I couldn't find the price of my signature, so I brought yours back.
The envelope was still damp when Nathaniel Greer walked through the glass doors of Kingsley Harbor Group at 6 in the morning. Outside, Milwaukee was drowning. Rain came down in sheets so thick the streetlights blurred into orange smears, and the 2 miles he had walked from Harbor Row were soaked into every thread of his jacket, every crease of his boots. He had not taken the bus. He had not called a cab. He had walked because walking felt like the only honest thing left to do. The lobby receptionist stared at him, a man in a maintenance uniform dripping onto the marble floor, holding a manila envelope to his chest like it contained something that could burn him. It contained $50,000 in cash. He rode the elevator to the 14th floor, pushed open the door to the corner office, and set the envelope down on Audra Kingsley's desk without a word. Then he placed a second document beside it. His real inspection report, every failure logged, every danger dated. "I couldn't find the price of my signature," he said quietly, "so I brought yours back." Audra looked up. Something moved across her face that no amount of money had ever put there before. If you're new here, this is the kind of story we tell on this channel about ordinary people who do extraordinary things when no one is watching. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Nathaniel Greer had learned a long time ago that buildings told the truth, even when people didn't. A pipe that sweated in November meant the insulation was gone. A baseboard that clicked 3 times before heat came through meant the valve was failing. A smell faint, almost sweet, hiding underneath the dust of an old utility room meant gas. It was never dramatic. It was never sudden. Buildings gave warnings for weeks before they gave disasters, and the only question was whether anyone with a clipboard and a conscience was paying attention. Nathaniel had been paying attention at Harbor Row Apartments for 3 years. Harbor Row sat on the eastern edge of Milwaukee's lower basin, a cluster of 6-story brick buildings that had been affordable housing since the 1980s and had the bones to prove it. The tenants were the kind of people cities forgot about between election cycles: retired postal workers, single mothers splitting 1 bedroom between 3 kids, elderly couples who had lived there so long their names were worn into the mailbox slots. Nathaniel knew most of them by first name. He knew which units had drafty windows and which hallway light had been flickering since October. He knew because it was his job, and because long before it was his job, he had understood what it meant to need a home to be safe. He had moved to Harbor Row 2 years after his wife, Caroline, died. A highway overpass, a patch of black ice a December morning that rewrote everything. Lena had been 7. Nathaniel had been 36, and suddenly, the high-paying systems engineering contract he had been chasing across 3 states meant nothing, because there was no longer anyone home to hold his daughter while he traveled. He took the Harbor Row position because it came with a unit on the 2nd floor and a schedule that guaranteed he would be there when Lena got off the school bus every afternoon at 3:27. The pay was modest. The work was unglamorous. He had never once regretted it. What he regretted standing in his kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night was that he had found the problem too late to fix it quietly. He had first noticed the signs 6 weeks earlier, a faint sulfur trace near the boiler room on the lower level of Building C, a pressure reading on the main heating line that dropped 2 points lower than it should have every time the temperature outside fell below freezing. He had filed a written report, documented with photographs, and submitted it to the property management contact at Kingsley Harbor Group. No response. He filed again 2 weeks later, more detailed, with a formal request for a licensed inspection. The reply he received was a single line from an operations coordinator named Gavin Pruitt. "The system has been reviewed and deemed within acceptable range. No further action required." Nathaniel had held that email for a long time before printing it, folding it, and putting it in the same folder where he kept every other document he had ever been told to forget. Then the envelope arrived. He found it on his doormat at 9:45 that evening, after he had put Lena to bed and come back to the kitchen to finish a cup of coffee that had gone cold. No return address, no name. Just a manila envelope slightly thicker than it should have been, with his name written in the careful block letters of someone who did not want their handwriting recognized. Inside was a pre-drafted safety certification form. Harbor Row's full HVAC and heating system, rated compliant, dated for that Friday. Beside it, banded in paper, was $50,000 in cash. And beneath the money, a note card with 8 words typed in plain font. "Sign the form. No one has to know." He sat down. For a long time, he did not move. He looked at the money the way a man looks at something he already knows the answer to, because the question isn't whether it's wrong. The question is whether he is tired enough, desperate enough, worn down enough to pretend it isn't. $50,000 was Caroline's remaining hospital bills, the ones that still sat in a drawer because he could not bring himself to open the collection notices. It was a new winter coat for Lena and the field trip she had quietly removed herself from the permission slip list because she knew they couldn't afford it. It was the roof over the storage unit that had been leaking since spring, the dental appointment he had rescheduled twice, the 6 months of breathing room that the difference between surviving and living actually required. He understood exactly what the money was offering. He also understood exactly what it was asking. If he signed that form, he would be certifying that the heating system in Building C was safe for winter operation. He knew it was not. He knew that when Milwaukee's temperatures dropped into the single digits in January, and they would, the failing pressure valve on the main line could allow gas to accumulate in the lower units. Slowly at first, the kind of slowly that happened while people were asleep. The families in units 1 through 6 of Building C included a retired teacher named Margaret, who kept her windows sealed with weather stripping because she couldn't afford to let any heat out. A young couple on the ground floor who had a 4-month-old. 2 brothers, maybe 10 and 12 years old, who always raced each other to the elevator when school let out. Nathaniel sat at his kitchen table until 2 in the morning. He did not open the envelope again. He walked to the doorway of Lena's room and stood there in the dark, listening to her breathe, watching the slow rise and fall of the blanket she had pulled up over her chin. She had her mother's habit of sleeping with one hand tucked under her cheek. He had never been able to look at that without feeling the full weight of everything Caroline had left behind. The trust, the responsibility, the unspoken requirement that he be the kind of man their daughter could point to someday and say, that is what a person is supposed to look like. He went back to the kitchen. He put the money back in the envelope. Then he sat down and wrote his real report. It took him until 4 in the morning, finding every date, every photograph, cross-referenced every attempt to report the issue through official channels, logged with timestamps, and the non-responses he had received. When he finished, he printed it, clipped it together, and set it on top of the envelope. He did not sleep. By 5:15, he was dressed, the envelope inside his jacket, and he was walking. The rain had started before midnight and had not let up. By the time Nathaniel reached the end of Harbor Row's access road, his jacket was soaked through at the shoulders. He kept walking, past the bus shelter on Clement Avenue where he could have waited for the number 47, past the cab that slowed near him on Meridian Street, the driver looking at him through the rain-streaked window with the quiet question of whether he needed a ride. He shook his head without breaking stride. There was something he needed to arrive having done himself. Not because it was practical, not because it proved anything to anyone watching, but because a man who had just spent the night deciding who he was needed to feel the full length of that decision under his feet. 2 miles. Wet pavement, orange streetlights, the sound of the city waking up in increments around him, delivery trucks, a bakery exhaust fan pushing warm air over a sidewalk grate. A woman walking a dog who looked at Nathaniel the way people look at someone doing something they can't quite categorize. He arrived at the Kingsley Harbor Group building at 6:03. The lobby was all glass and polished stone, the kind of entrance designed to communicate that the people inside operated at a different altitude than the people outside. The receptionist at the front desk looked up from her monitor and took him in, wet work boots, maintenance jacket with the Harbor Row patch on the chest. A man who looked like he had walked through the rain because he meant to. Nathaniel told her he needed to see Audra Kingsley. The receptionist told him Ms. Kingsley did not take unscheduled meetings before 9. Nathaniel nodded and said he would wait. He waited 40 minutes sitting in one of the lobby chairs, leaving a faint, damp impression on the upholstery. At 6:47, a woman in a charcoal blazer stepped off the elevator and walked toward him with the measured pace of someone who had been told there was a problem and had decided to assess it personally rather than send someone else. Audra Kingsley was sharp-eyed and composed, the kind of composed that came from years of holding rooms together through force of attention. She looked at the wet jacket, the manila envelope, and then at his face. She said, "Follow me." Her office was on the 14th floor, corner-facing with a view of the river that on a clearer morning would have been striking. She sat behind a wide desk and looked at him with the particular patience of someone who had learned that listening first was cheaper than reacting first. Nathaniel did not sit. He reached inside his jacket, took out the envelope, and set it on her desk. Then he set the inspection report beside it, the pages slightly soft from the moisture that had worked through his jacket over 2 miles of rain. "I couldn't find the price of my signature," he said, "so I brought yours back." Audra did not reach for the envelope immediately. She looked at it, then at the report. Her eyes moved down the first page, and something shifted in her expression, a tightening, a recognition. Her hand went still against the desk surface. "Who sent this to you?" she said. "That's your question to answer," Nathaniel said. "Mine was whether to keep it. I'm done with my part." He turned to leave. Behind him, he heard her chair move, heard her stand. "Mr. Greer." Her voice was even, but there was something underneath it that had not been there 30 seconds ago. "It's still raining. My driver can take you wherever you need to go." He stopped at the door. He did not look back. "I'll walk," he said. And then he was in the hallway, and the elevator doors were closing in front of him. And behind him in that corner office, Audra Kingsley was sitting back down in front of $50,000 in cash and a safety report that was about to change everything she thought she knew about her own company. The walk back to Harbor Row took longer than the walk out. It wasn't the distance. It was the way the rain had settled into something permanent, the kind of steady gray pour that stops feeling like weather and starts feeling like a condition. Nathaniel moved through it with his hands in his pockets and his jacket collar turned up. And he was halfway down Meridian Street when his phone buzzed with a message from the Harbor Row property management system. His access card had been deactivated effective immediately, pending an internal review. He stopped walking. He read the message twice. Then he put his phone back in his pocket and kept moving. By the time he reached Harbor Row, the front maintenance entrance would not accept his card. He stood at the door for a moment, rain running off the brim of his cap, and looked at the small red light on the reader that had been green every morning for 3 years. Through the lobby window, he could see the building manager, a soft-spoken man named Dennis, pointedly not looking in his direction from behind the front desk. Nathaniel did not knock. He turned around and walked to the second-floor resident entrance, used his personal key. His access as a tenant had not been revoked, only his access to the maintenance areas, and went upstairs to his apartment. Lena was at school. The apartment was quiet. He changed out of his wet clothes, made coffee, and sat at the same kitchen table where he had made his decision the night before. His work email had been suspended. A formal notice arrived in his personal inbox 40 minutes later from the Kingsley Harbor Group legal department, informing him that he had been placed on unpaid administrative leave while the company investigated allegations of misconduct related to a financial irregularity. Allegations of misconduct. He read that phrase 3 times. He understood what was happening. He had walked into that office and placed $50,000 on a powerful woman's desk and named no one accused, no one simply returned the money and told the truth. And now, someone inside that company, someone who had sent the envelope, someone who had something to lose, was moving faster than he had anticipated. What he did not know yet was that the same morning he was sitting at his kitchen table reading suspension notices, Gavin Pruitt was in a conference room on the 12th floor of the Kingsley Harbor building, telling a carefully assembled story. Gavin had been with Kingsley Harbor Group for 9 years, long enough to know where every procedural body was buried and which board members asked questions and which ones preferred summaries. He was organized, persuasive, and he had spent the hours between Nathaniel's departure and the start of the business day constructing a version of events in which the maintenance supervisor from Harbor Row had accepted a cash payment from an unknown third party, fabricated a safety complaint to create leverage, and then staged a dramatic return of the money to position himself as a whistleblower while actually attempting to extort the company. It was the kind of story that worked because it was complicated enough to sound researched, and because it answered the question that powerful people always asked first: what does this person want from us? By noon, the internal communications channel that connected Harbor Row's property staff had a message pinned at the top from the regional operations desk. It described Nathaniel as a disgruntled employee who had made unsubstantiated safety claims and was under investigation. It did not use his name, but Harbor Row had 11 maintenance staff members and only one of them had failed to show up for his shift that morning. Word traveled the way word always travels in a building where people share laundry rooms and elevator rides. By the time Lena came home from school at 3:27 and dropped her backpack by the door, 2 neighbors had already offered Nathaniel sympathetic looks in the stairwell that told him the story had gotten there before he had. He made Lena a sandwich and did not tell her anything was wrong. She sat at the counter and talked about a project on migratory birds and ate her apple slices and did not notice that her father's phone had buzzed 11 times since she walked in, or that he had answered none of the calls. Audra Kingsley noticed. She had spent the hours after Nathaniel left her office doing 2 things simultaneously: managing the surface of her morning 2 scheduled calls, a briefing with her acquisitions team about the Harbor Row sale timeline, while underneath, very quietly pulling thread. The $50,000 had come from a real account. That much she confirmed within the hour. It was a discretionary operations fund, nominally used for vendor relations and emergency property expenses that fell under Gavin Pruitt's direct authorization. She did not confront him immediately. She had not built a company by showing her hand before she understood the table. Instead, that afternoon, she told her assistant she was taking a site visit and drove to Harbor Row alone, without her usual team, in a car that was deliberately unremarkable. She wore a dark coat and no lanyard, and she stood under the overhang of the building's east entrance for 20 minutes, while 2 women talked near the mailboxes, and a man in his 70s sat on the interior bench waiting for his wife to come down. She listened. The women were talking about the heat. One of them, heavy-set with a grocery bag over each arm, said the radiator in her unit had been knocking since October, and she had put in 3 requests. The older man on the bench said someone had finally come and looked at his bathroom pipe in September. That young fellow from maintenance, he said, the one with the little girl, and had fixed it the same day, wouldn't take a thing for it, said it was already on his list. Audra walked the building. She found the door to the basement utility level propped open with a toolbox and went down. What she found in the basement was not a disaster. It was something more damning than a disaster. It was a record. Nathaniel had been keeping a log on the wall-mounted maintenance board in the utility room. Not a formal log, not one submitted to the company, but a working document in his own handwriting. The kind a man keeps when he has stopped trusting that his submitted reports are being read. Dates, readings, photographs printed on standard paper and taped beside the corresponding entries. Notes in the margins that were neither dramatic nor bureaucratic, but simply precise. Valve pressure dropped again. 3rd time this month. Submitted report 11-4, no response. Submitted report 11-18, response, no action required. And near the bottom of the most recent page, underlined once, do not allow residents in units 1 through 6 to run heat overnight until main line is replaced. This is not a precaution. This is the difference. She stood in the basement of her own building and read a careful man's careful warnings. Warnings that had been filed, blocked, and buried for 4 months while her company prepared to sell the building to someone else and call it someone else's problem. She took photographs of every page. Then she went back to her car and sat in it for a long time before she started the engine. Gavin moved the following morning. He had 19 years of experience watching which way corporate winds blew, and the fact that Audra had taken an unscheduled solo site visit to Harbor Row told him everything he needed to know about which direction her attention was turning. He made 3 calls before 8 in the morning. The first was to Harbor Row's building management company, instructing them to issue a lease termination notice to the occupant of Unit 214, Nathaniel Greer, on the grounds that the apartment was a staff benefit unit tied to active employment and that employment had been suspended. The notice would give Nathaniel 30 days, which was technically legal and practically brutal. The second call was to a contact at a trade publication where he placed a background item about a Harbor Row maintenance employee who had a prior professional dispute on his record, a lawsuit from 4 years earlier, filed by a contractor who claimed Nathaniel's refusal to sign off on a heating installation had cost them a significant penalty. Gavin left out the reason for the refusal, which was that the installation had failed to meet municipal fire code by a margin that would have made it dangerous. The lawsuit had been dismissed. The headline, stripped of context, would not mention that. The third call was to Dennis, the building manager, telling him that if Nathaniel attempted to access any maintenance areas, security should be notified immediately. By the time Nathaniel found the lease termination notice slipped under his door that evening, Lena was doing homework at the kitchen table. He read it standing in the hallway with the door half open, then folded it once and put it in his back pocket. He went inside, sat across from his daughter, and watched her work through a long division problem with the focused frown she had inherited directly from her mother. He had options. He could stay quiet. He could let the investigation resolve itself, find another job, move to another building, put enough distance between himself and Harbor Row that the whole thing faded into a difficult chapter he did not have to explain to his daughter for at least a few more years. He was good at his work. He would find something. It would cost them, but they would be all right. Or he could keep going. He did not decide that night. He made dinner, helped Lena review her homework, read 2 chapters of the book they had been working through together before bed. After she was asleep, he went back to the kitchen and opened his laptop and looked at the photographs he had taken of his own documentation in the basement utility room 3 weeks earlier, back when he had started to understand that his reports were being buried. He had copies of everything. Every report, every timestamp, every non-response from Gavin Pruitt's office. He had not yet decided what to do with them, but he had them. 2 nights later, the rain returned. It came in the way serious weather comes to Milwaukee in late autumn, not gradually, not as a warning, but as a statement. By 10 in the evening, the gutters were running over, and the basement of Building C was taking on water through a foundation crack that Nathaniel had flagged in a report 8 months earlier and that had never been repaired. He knew this because Margaret from Unit 3 knocked on his door at 10:45, still in her housecoat, to tell him there was a smell in the hallway she didn't like. Nathaniel knew that smell. He grabbed his jacket and his toolkit and went downstairs. The smell was faint in the first-floor hallway, that almost sweet sulfur trace that meant gas was present but not yet concentrated. He went to the basement door. It was sealed with a printed notice taped across the frame. Restricted access. Authorized personnel only. Kingsley Harbor Group operations. His name had been removed from the authorized personnel list 72 hours ago. He was still a resident of the building, still legally present on the premises, but the maintenance areas were no longer his to enter. He looked at the notice. He looked at the door. He thought about the 4-month-old in Unit 2. He broke the seal and went in. The water on the basement floor was ankle-deep and cold. The main heating line ran along the north wall, and in the dim light of his work flashlight, he could see the pressure gauge on the primary valve sitting at a reading that should have triggered an automatic shutoff and hadn't, because the shutoff sensor had been flagged as faulty in a report he had submitted in October and never seen repaired. The gas was venting slowly through a microfracture in the coupling joint, the exact point he had documented, photographed, and submitted reports about on 3 separate occasions. He waded to the valve, set his flashlight on a dry ledge, and worked. His hands knew what to do independently of whatever the rest of him was feeling. He isolated the line, engaged the manual override, and closed the emergency shutoff in 11 minutes. The hiss of venting gas went quiet. He stood in the dark water and listened to the building breathe around him, the creak of pipes, the distant sound of a television through the ceiling, the ordinary sounds of people living their lives inside walls that had just come closer to killing them than any of them knew. When he came back upstairs, 2 police officers were waiting in the lobby. Gavin's instructions to Dennis had apparently included standing orders. Nathaniel was escorted out of the building and taken to the district station on Holloway Avenue to be processed for trespassing on restricted company property. He did not argue. He answered every question factually and without elaboration, and when the officer across the table asked him why he had broken a company seal on a restricted access door, he said simply, "Because there were people sleeping above a gas leak." The officer wrote that down. It was after midnight when Lena arrived at the station. A neighbor had heard the commotion and called the number on the emergency contact list Nathaniel kept pinned inside the kitchen cabinet. Lena was 9 years old, and she was standing in the waiting area of a police station in the rain, her backpack on because she had grabbed it out of habit, her face doing the thing it did when she was frightened and trying not to show it. Nathaniel saw her through the glass partition, and something in his chest pulled tight in a way that had nothing to do with anything legal. Audra arrived 20 minutes later. She had been alerted by a property management notification that went to her emergency line whenever police were involved at one of her buildings. She walked into the station in a coat over clothes she had clearly put on quickly, spoke to the desk officer, and then came to where Nathaniel was sitting in the waiting area beside Lena. She crouched down to Lena's eye level first. She said quietly that everything was going to be all right, that her dad had done something very brave, and that she was going to make sure they both got home safely. Then she stood and looked at Nathaniel. "I have a lawyer outside," she said. "She can have you out of here in an hour." Nathaniel looked at his daughter for a moment, then back at Audra. His voice, when it came, was not angry. It was tired in the particular way of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is no longer willing to carry it for someone else's benefit. "I don't need you to save my name," he said. "I need you to tell the truth about your company." Audra held his gaze. Outside, the rain was still coming down on a city that did not know how close Building C had come to a very different kind of morning. Inside the station, Lena reached over and took her father's hand, and Nathaniel let her, and the moment held the weight of everything that still needed to be said. Audra did not sleep that night. She drove home from the police station at close to 2 in the morning, and she sat at her kitchen table, not her office, not her desk, her kitchen table, and spread out everything she had. The photographs from the basement utility room, the financial trace on the $50,000, the chain of internal emails she had pulled from the operations server that afternoon before anyone thought to restrict her access to Gavin's files. She had been running companies long enough to know what a cover-up looked like from the inside. She had also been running them long enough to know that cover-ups did not survive without someone at the top who had made it easier to look away than to look. That person she understood by 3 in the morning had been her. Not because she had known, she hadn't known, but because she had built a structure where a man like Gavin Pruitt could function for 9 years without anyone above him asking the right questions, and because she had looked at Harbor Row for the past 2 years and seen a line on a balance sheet rather than a building where people lived. She had not sent the envelope, but she had created the conditions in which sending it made sense to someone. She called her general counsel at 6 in the morning and told him to clear his day. The emergency board meeting convened at 9. Audra presented everything without preamble, the documentation from the basement, the financial records tracing the $50,000 to Gavin's discretionary fund, the internal emails showing that Nathaniel's safety reports had been received, flagged, and deliberately held from reaching her desk over a period of 4 months. She laid it out the way Nathaniel had laid out his inspection findings, factually, chronologically, without drama, because the facts were dramatic enough on their own. Gavin Pruitt was escorted from the building by 11 o'clock. The board voted to suspend the Harbor Row sale immediately pending a full independent audit. The legal team began preparing a disclosure package for the city's housing authority. None of it felt like victory. It felt like the minimum. That afternoon, Audra's lawyer secured the dismissal of the trespassing charge against Nathaniel. The district attorney had reviewed the gas leak documentation and determined that prosecution was not in the public interest. A formal way of saying that charging a man for preventing a disaster would have been impossible to justify. The lease termination notice was formally rescinded. His suspension was lifted. Audra called Nathaniel herself to tell him. He picked up on the third ring. She told him the charges were dropped, the suspension was over, and his apartment was his. She told him Gavin had been terminated and the sale was halted. She told him she intended to commission a full safety audit of every property in Kingsley Harbor Group's affordable housing portfolio, starting with Harbor Row. There was a silence on his end that she did not try to fill. "I appreciate that," he said finally. "I do, but I'm not coming back to the same job."
Audra had expected that.
"What would it take?" she asked. "It's not about what it takes," he said. "It's about what the job actually is. Right now, the maintenance supervisor at Harbor Row submits reports to an operations coordinator who decides what reaches you. That's the system that buried 4 months of safety filings. If I go back and nothing changes structurally, I'm just a man with a clipboard that someone can ignore again the next time it's convenient." "Then tell me what the structure should look like," she said. He did not tell her that day. That day, he picked Lena up from school and took her to a diner 2 blocks from Harbor Row that had been there since the 1970s and still served the same chicken soup that had no business being as good as it was. He let her talk about her migratory birds project, which had apparently expanded to include a hand-drawn map of the Atlantic Flyway. He drank his coffee and listened, and did not think about Gavin Pruitt or the board meeting or the $50,000 sitting in an evidence locker somewhere. He thought about what Lena had asked him 3 nights earlier when he had told her they might need to stay somewhere else for a little while, and she had looked at him with those clear, serious eyes and said, "If you gave the money back because it wasn't right, why are the people who did the wrong thing still winning?" He had not had a good answer then. He thought he might have one now. That night, after Lena was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and thought about the question the way he thought about a failing system, not from the symptom backward, but from the structure down. The problem was never just Gavin. The problem was a chain of authorization that let one person decide what the person above them was allowed to know. The fix was not a better person in Gavin's role. The fix was a structure in which no single person could make that decision alone.
The next morning, he called Audra back.
What he proposed was not complicated, but it required Audra to give up something companies rarely gave up willingly: unilateral control over the people who told them uncomfortable things. He wanted an independent safety oversight board for Kingsley Harbor's affordable housing properties, not staffed by company appointees, but by a combination of licensed engineers, resident representatives, and a city housing liaison. He wanted the maintenance supervisors at every property to report safety findings directly to that board with a mandatory response window and a documented escalation path that could not be intercepted by anyone in the operations chain. And he wanted that board to have actual authority, not advisory authority, not the authority to recommend, but the authority to halt any project, any sale, any renovation, if the safety documentation was not clean.
"That's going to slow things down,"
Audra said. "Yes," Nathaniel said, "that's the point." She agreed to all of it. The meeting she called at Harbor Row 2 weeks later was not held in a conference room. Audra had suggested the community room on the ground floor of Building A, and Nathaniel had told her that if she wanted the residents to trust what she was saying, she should say it in the courtyard where everyone could see her and no one had to wait to be let in through a door. It was cold. The kind of dry, biting cold that comes to Milwaukee in late November and reminds everyone that December is not a theory. Audra stood in the courtyard in a coat that was warm but not expensive, and she spoke to the people of Harbor Row without notes. She said that their building had been mismanaged and that the mismanagement had put them in danger. She said that safety reports filed by their maintenance supervisor had been blocked from reaching her, and that while she had not given the order to block them, she had built a company where that was possible, and that was her responsibility to own. She said the sale of Harbor Row was canceled, and that the heating system would be fully replaced before winter at the company's expense, with no cost passed to residents. She said a new oversight board was being established, and that 2 of its seats would be filled by residents of Kingsley Harbor properties elected by their neighbors. Margaret from Unit 3 was standing near the back of the courtyard in her good coat. She did not applaud when Audra finished. She looked at Nathaniel, who was standing to the side, and gave him the slow, certain nod of a woman who has been waiting a long time for someone to finally say the true thing out loud. After the meeting, Audra found Nathaniel near the building entrance. She told him the formal offer was ready. Director of Safety Operations for Kingsley Harbor's Affordable Housing Division, overseeing maintenance and inspection standards across all 11 properties in the portfolio. The salary she named was more than 3 times what he had been earning. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "That's not why I did any of this," he said. "I know," Audra said. "That's why I'm offering it to you and not someone else." He accepted, not because of the salary, though the salary meant that Caroline's hospital bills would finally be paid in full and that Lena's field trip permission slip would not be a quiet calculation anymore. He accepted because Audra had asked him what the structure should look like, and he had told her, and she had said yes, and there was only one way to find out whether she meant it. The heating system at Harbor Row was replaced over a 6-week period that ran through December and into January. The work was contracted to a licensed firm that Nathaniel selected and supervised, and every phase was signed off by the new oversight board before the next phase began. The residents of Units 1 through 6 in Building C ran their heat through the coldest nights of January without a single alarm, without a single smell, without a single reason to be afraid. Margaret told Nathaniel in the elevator one morning that she had slept with her window cracked for the first time in 2 years, just because she could. In the first week of February, Audra came to Harbor Row for the final inspection sign-off. The Oversight Board had reviewed the completed work the City Housing Liaison had done her walkthrough, and everything was certified clean. Nathaniel walked Audra through the basement utility room last. The wall-mounted maintenance board was still there, but the pages of handwritten warnings were gone, replaced by a new log sheet properly formatted, with a chain of custody that ran all the way to the Oversight Board's public record. When they came back up to the courtyard, it was raining. Not the heavy, punishing rain of that first morning 2 months earlier, but a softer version, cold and steady, and carrying the faint suggestion that it might eventually become something else. Lena was waiting by the entrance with her backpack on, having walked from the school bus stop 2 blocks away, and she looked up at the rain with the quiet ease of a child who had learned not to be bothered by things she could not change. Audra's car was parked at the curb. Her driver stood outside it with an umbrella. She looked at Nathaniel and then at Lena, and she said, "Let me have Thomas drive you both home. It's right upstairs, I know, but she's going to get soaked." Lena looked at her father. Nathaniel looked at the rain. He looked at the building behind him, the brick face of it, the lit windows, the lobby where Dennis was visible at the front desk, doing something mundane and ordinary and safe. He looked at his daughter, who was watching him with an expression that was patient and curious and entirely willing to walk in the rain if that was what they were doing. He smiled small, settled the kind that comes from somewhere that has stopped needing to prove itself. "I'll walk," he said. Lena reached over and took his hand without being asked. And then Audra said nothing, did not argue, did not offer again, did not reach for the authority or the resources that had always been her first language. Instead, she said 2 words quietly to her driver. "It's fine." She folded her coat collar up, stepped off the curb, and fell into step beside them. 3 people walked through the rain on a February evening in Milwaukee. No one was rescued by money. No one was rescued by power. The building behind them was warm, the people inside it were safe, and nobody needed a ride. There's something worth sitting with at the end of a story like this. Nathaniel didn't walk 2 miles in the rain because he was fearless. He did it because he understood that some things once compromised cannot be quietly repaired, and a signature is one of them. He was not a wealthy man. He was not a man with connections or leverage or a safety net. He was a man who knew the difference between money that helps you live and money that makes you into someone you don't recognize. And he chose the harder thing when no one was watching, and nothing guaranteed it would work out. If that kind of story matters to you, stories about people who do the right thing not because it's easy, but because it's the only thing they can live with, then subscribe to this channel. We tell these stories because we believe they're worth telling, and because somewhere in all of them is a reminder of what people are actually capable of when they decide who they want to be. Thank you for listening.